Welcome. This is an introduction to incarnating vision and routine. My name is Michael Stumpf. I'll be somewhat facilitating, I would say, this cafe, not necessarily leading it, but I'm going to put forth my best effort to bring forth a lot of juiciness around this topic. But I'd like to begin this with a phrase that is posted on there, playing behind the beat, a pause. So I would like, when we have the cafe, I will be doing this, that we, and I'll lead it, that we bow to each other from whatever space that we are in and bow to sharing the space on cyberspace. So thank you very much. So this this was this I ran across this paper and it seemed to really resonate with a theme that might be taking place uh, at the cafe and talking about these two uh, polar opposites of vision and routine. And it was really routine that struck me, and then vision. Routine in the way that the author presented it, and routine in terms of its word is repetition. And it this repetition in today's world is really an interesting thing because we have, as human beings, we have natural repetition of breathing, um, eating, and or what I would call organic repetition. But for the last maybe, I forget, maybe 500 years or age enlightenment, we have me mechanized repetition that human beings observed in their environment. And so with this movement from organic repetition to mechanized repetition, it has created, for me, a sense of disassociation because we've focused so much on the mechanized repetition and kind of gotten off of whack with the organic repetition. And we're at a point in our planetary time that there's this mechanized and organic repetition is kind of just struggling to find out how can we move it forward. And the thing is, on the cafe, we talk a lot about trying to challenge, in my view, challenge the binary of this and that. You know, it's one way or the other. And we brought forward, Johnny Davis has brought forward, which I totally agree, that we need to look at the middle and stop excluding the middle. And I think that's what I have taken with vision and routine. That and is a middle. And for me, every human being, it seems to me, is born with a certain sense that who dropped me into this soap opera right in the middle. You don't know what is what where's heads, where's it, other than as you grow up, you're taught to think of what is what or what not. But you're still in the middle. You know, we're actually in the middle already. And what I'm trying to promote with this cafe is, with everything that we've learned, and like Johnny points out, we need to learn to actually feel good about being in the middle, or at least good enough. And when I say that, that is not trying to exclude vision, the vision part, or what I would call maybe experiences that seem to be outside our feeling of middleness. Um, I'm just saying that our middleness, if we begin to make simple practices of routine, healthy, efficient routine discipline of working with our messy middle in our own bodies and brains, we establish a certain skill set to be in the middle, whether it's no matter the state of consciousness, possibly, but especially when the state of consciousness is one of conflict. And conflict is a good practice to work with, because conflict is about the tension of difference between my middle and your middle. Yet there's a space that shares all this. And we are at, I can speak for myself, not everybody else, but sometimes that space in between, or your sense of middleness, scares me, triggers me. But the more I work with the intensity and the tension and show myself that I can work it and it's a skill set, then what happens is I begin to realize my middleness doesn't need to be built around a solid fort defending against everything. It's actually, my middleness begins to show a certain ease with being open. Doesn't mean you can't close off, but you take responsibility when you're closing, and it's not just an unconscious act. My image, a working image or metaphor, is our middle is our house. And how many people, because of pain and woundedness from this universe, have built walls, closed windows, and rarely go outside, and they'll pull back? Or how many people have built their house where I have to have certain outside defenses already set in place and stuff? And that, I want to just say that in certain situations, that's probably wise. I'm not going to try to, I'm trying not to speak in absolutes. It's a workable skill without being driven by absolutes. So in my history of working with this, of having to recover from a very bad accident where I actually had to face my own death and then come back to life, in the last 18 years, I've learned how to appreciate being contracted, closing the doors and spending time there, but also healing so that, oh, I can open the windows, I can open the doors, I can let the air, I can let other people move freely. I still have the choice to close the doors, but how much awareness do we bring? And this is where routine comes in. If we have a routine that is flexible and but yet what's the word for it, consistent or coherent, then that's going to help with our bringing forth a vision to move beyond ourselves, for our families, and for this planet. But there is an inefficient way, and this is one thing I really liked about the article, is this author framed it: vision, routine, there's a polarity. Then he took, and on each side he showed the efficient and the efficient and inefficient of that point of view of working from routine. And the same thing with vision, because when vision is great, we need to be inspired. I like how he pulled in the word inspired as part of vision. But there's a downside to, if we're so inspired where we're kind of just losing contact with our feet on the ground, in the sense that there are other people, there's a world beyond our middleness that we have to work with. And so I like the way that he gave a context of understanding efficient and inefficient, of both points of view. And this is something I think that can help, this way of understanding polarity and the fact that this world is made of functions from a sense of polarity, but how, with us being in the having this this feeling of being in the middle, which has been affected since we were born and we came into a family. Just to ground this in myself, by working with that essay, I began to realize how much of my feeling being in the middle came from being born and having a mother and a father, and they had efficient and they had inefficient ways of parenting. But I'm stuck in the middle, you know? And I still to this day have a little history of where, not to cast blame or anything, that maybe at times they acted with inefficiently, not intentionally necessarily, although in some in some cases that is true. But how that impacted my sense of middleness when I was young. The gift of my accident is that article represented, I've been balancing as I've been recovering between having a routine to come forward and heal, because that was my vision. And then that going back and forth the last 18 years, how do I establish a routine to heal from my accident and what the trauma that it caused, having that vision to heal. But in the last 5 years, that has morphed in not just a vision for myself of healing, but for the world at this time. And we need to understand, having a routine, another word for it would be discipline. You know, a lot of people don't like that word. But you know, practice. So what I'm trying to stimulate in this dialogue is actually, I'm trying to bring forward what I've sensed on the cafe. Okay, we've talked about vision. We talked about the need for technique and you know, what's your plan, or what result did you want? And those are necessary components, but there's a third option, or a third reality that has been brought up. Okay, now let's actually work with the middle. It's messy. It doesn't feel as clean as talking about a vision or having, it's not as clean, but we need those for clarity. We need that understanding. But the real work, it seems to me, is how do we walk between those two? How do we actually act in such a way that we're moving forward to what we want, and not just talking about what we want. We need to have, and I think we need to have a routine. One of the things I want to say about the cafe that has brought this forward for me, having my routine of going and looking what's available this week in the cafe that I want to listen to, having that kind of routine of going forward and deciding if I want to participate in the dialogue has helped me practice what I'm trying to express. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. Would you like for me to respond?
Yes, I would like to hear your response, Doug. That would be good.
So you titled it Incarnating Routine and Vision.
Right.
Which I felt that was an interesting word choice there. Somewhat spiritual, the word.
Oh, definitely somewhat spiritual. Yeah.
A bit away from the Buddhist, or maybe that's more Hindu belief of reincarnation. So this is something that needs to be brought forth, as you say. So it's perhaps we haven't been doing it, at least here on the site. You're saying we have division, we have so much vision, I believe, and that has been an ongoing struggle for for perhaps each individual on Earth, just finding this middle, or a way through the muddy middle, the muddle in the muddy middle. So I think the conversation will not solve all the problems, but I appreciate your direction you're giving it here. I think it's interesting that this is written by Bhikkhu Bodhi, who's definitely a practicing ascetic, but he's showing he has an aesthetic side to him, or that it's a part of his daily routine is this seeking out the vision.
Yes.
Which I found that to be very interesting. Of course, there's the stereotypical monk that shuns the world, but that's something that's making progress. There's progress within Buddhism. You are somewhat of a practicing Buddhist yourself, from what you mentioned.
I'm actually both Christian and Buddhist. I purposely use the word incarnating because of my Christian part. And if you don't mind me digressing, I use the word because the way I understand it in several articles, that, like, there's one by Chris Durkis who said incarnation, not embodiment. And he's going off of David Spangler, who is a mystic. And just drawing the distinction, the embodiment part is us owning and really bringing awareness to our own particular body form. And what incarnating does is kind of taking that further of, okay, you've embodied in this body, and you're feeling at home with that. Incarnating is the next step is, okay, you have a larger body, incarnating the world as such. Just riffing off of I'm not just riffing off of the Christian symbolism, of Jesus incarnating, of being in the world and coming forth. And his vision was, the love of God. Buddha's vision was freeing people from suffering, and there's a crossover between both of them in my book, in the way I see it. And so, I use incarnating very purposefully because, one, I think that, again, I'm just going to say, it's just like this conversation between me and you is about incarnating through conversation, through cyberspace, a mutual understanding without needing to. We don't have to necessarily agree. So it's trying to learn how to work with this technology that's been mechanized, which I'm just riffing right now about this because I happen to agree with Marshall McLuhan that this technology, this mechanization, is a form of actually extension of our own bodies. Our own bodies are a technology that is organic in terms of the rest of the universe. It's an organic form of technology that's been dropped right in the middle of the universe. And it's part of, the thing is our bodies are part of the earth. Comes out, everything in our bodies is in the earth. Everything in the earth is in our bodies. Is that,
Yeah, that makes sense. And I'm interested in how Suzanne Langer, you mentioned another reference to, I think it's a philosophy and a new key.
Yes.
How will that tie into the discussion?
Well, I think how that ties in the conversation is it's is my blind spot is a lot of times I haven't the access to other people that read that book or academics that read it that might give a critique. So I just digest it and see how it hits me.
Right.
I believe that she was one of my understanding first to understand that philosophy itself is an art form, because it's an art form because philosophy is about getting clear about ideas and how they function. And ideas, philosophy is about the art. How do we create ideas? How do we interact with them? How do they serve us? And so art being ground in the senses, then philosophy is the art of understanding the reality, not the some absolute reality, but the reality that ideas are what we come to use in relationship to the big reality that exists. And we need to take ownership of our artistic creation and interaction with those ideas. So she was trying to, and her highest, and another key is she feeling informed, and the way I understand it, feeling informed, she was really trying to work with that notion and considering, if I read her right, music is one of the, you could say, the highest art forms because it brings it together vision and feeling. They come together. An artist has a vision of what they want to do, and then they have to put it in form for themselves and then share that form with other people's. Hopefully, the others, if they're open, will have a similar experience that they do by creating the music, playing the music. That's why I've been interjecting or interspersing the notion of jazz. Um, I'm influenced by Greg Thomas, who has what he calls a jazz school for leadership, and trying to help groups come together. Like if you read the last thing I added on Martin Marcellus, how jazz helps us work as a group, as an ensemble, where each individual can come forward and shine, the others back them up, and so it's not so fixated on this either or of totally an individual or totally the group. It's about the many in one expressing a form of a conversation about what the fuck is this all about.
So with jazz, the first thing that comes to mind is solely vision as an art form.
Yeah.
Of course, as a collective, then that would be some sort of collective vision, and that's what we're collecting here. We're collecting
Right.
visions in a certain sense. So how does this tie into? I don't know if you saw Ed's short post on the music thread of the pianist who does the. I didn't get a chance to watch it, but I know what's going on there.
I did
there.
watch. I did watch it, and the response I have is something that I heard from a podcast, and I can't quote where, but this is the gist of it. So I may not get it. I hope I'm not too off, but there was a artist and a mathematician. They were talking about art or having an aesthetic sense, and the mathematician told the artist that he felt that art was similar to mathematics in that art, as practiced through music or poetry, is compressing information down to its barest form and giving it an expression. Like mathematical things is compressing all this information down and using its particular form to give voice to what's happened, with interpreting the information, or trying to understand the information from a mathematical point of view. But in the big picture, art is a form of compressing, but it doesn't necessarily go down to that level. Does that have any sense?
That makes complete sense. And perhaps I wanted to take, since the Fibonacci sequence is a natural repetition.
Yeah.
which is perhaps the ultimate creativity of what's going on around us. And perhaps jazz, if you were to listen to the pianist just playing and not know the background of the Fibonacci sequence, you might think this could be jazz, because it's within the routine of the keyboard layout. But if we were to play the song of the universe through the Fibonacci sequence, it couldn't be contained within the piano.
Yes.
But it's still music to our ears. So what you're saying makes sense. What I'm trying to articulate probably doesn't just yet. Perhaps because it's a vision forming, and that's another issue for me personally. And I think you would agree that articulating through speech is a challenge for some of us.
Yes.
What our visions are. So
well, and as also Susan Langer says, the thing about artists is their vocabulary is strongly metaphorical, and so that's different than science. Even though science will use metaphor, but it's weighted more to the mathematical, more precise use of language and vocabulary. And so that's another thing she talks about, is the different uses of language to express human knowledge. Interesting side note that I find interesting is Alan Watts. I have it here. I don't know if I'll get it up, but Alan Watts was talking about this issue about how people relate to language, and language being so abstract and stuff. And basically he said, if you go back to the deep Upanishads and how they studied sound and music, when music was part of humanity thousands of years ago, they were forming understandings of different sounds and the octaves and all that, and they were making notations, notating it. Well, Watts's point of view is language is a form of notation of the same thing, but it's more expanded. That think about it in the sense that in this dialogue, there's been a rhythm, been an exchange of listening to the tone, the sound. So language can have, I think does have, but our listening ears sometimes don't appreciate that nonverbal musicality of language, of conversation. And if one thing I like about jazz, and I think, a lot of people have a hard time with jazz, and I think the reason they have a hard time with jazz, and this is just me riffing, jazz is probably the first discipline to actually enjoy the chaos, to actually enjoy the mess and do something with it. Well, these other forms of music, and I know I may be overgeneralizing, but I don't mean to, but that's my sense of jazz. It's if you I go to the cafe, these musicians, though, they have a routine of coming together and playing. They know they put in their time to know the scales and know the music. And some of the most famous jazz artists, like Charlie Parker, that Greg Thomas talks about sometimes, is at an early age, he learned music, but he had this vision or this inspiration. Yeah, that's how people think that sound should go, but I'm going to bend it to a different level. I'm going to take it to the different level in my horn. So that's vision, but Charlie Parker says, he, for a longest time, especially in the early years, he practiced 15, 12 hours a day. So the routine, grounding your routine in some kind of, I guess, practice being a type of routine, but also you have to keep the vision and be inspired of when that routine may go stale. And so you got to bring back the inspiration. So there is this oscillation.
Right.
It seems to me, and it's a working metaphor. It's a working metaphor for me at this point of how I've healed. Now, since the beginning, I've always been working with metaphors that help me, that have helped me heal at certain times. And one thing I like about Johnny, and when we did the alternate realities, is that time spent helped me to appreciate that I carry around metaphors inside of me that I gathered from my environment. I carry them around. And that practice that he brought forward was bringing more awareness that I do have metaphors, but how aware am I of how I'm using those metaphors, and how those metaphors may be affecting me in such a way they give me a bad attitude. Like I heard my nephew the other day, I'm just going to kill him with kindness. Now I didn't overreact. In my head, I'm going, well, that's a poor metaphor. That's too aggressive, you know? And so I don't know if I'm good at creating a metaphor, but I'm good at sensing and being sensitive to how I use and others use metaphor to express themselves.
I think we should kill him with jazz.
Yeah.
So do you have anything to add to this conversation, or the conversation to be had?
Yeah. Well, this has been so inspiring. I think jazz musically represents the juice of messiness. You know, and you know, to a certain extent, we need to have awareness of the inefficient and efficient. The inefficient, to a certain degree, we need to pay attention to the inefficient way that technology and what's happening in the world, how that inefficient, how not being aware of the inefficient use of technology, whether it's language or our screens or whatever, we need to be aware of that. And I don't want to dismiss that, but I'm trying to bring forth a way to be aware, grounded, and to a certain extent, just, okay, this is the best I can do. So that's all I know. That's what I will end with.
Great. Well, thank you, Michael. And I guess I'll end with stating that I'll come in with an open mind, maybe a big heart, maybe my third ear. So,
I love it. You brought forth so many good metaphors. I love it.
So thank you for initiating this conversation.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Doug, for being my support system with this. Take care, buddy.
You too. Goodbye. Bye.